So, good afternoon and welcome to the launch of Practicing Justice. It's Nathan Brown's latest book, but the one he's been thinking about for the longest time. And I'm Brenton Stacey from Sydney Adventist Forum. Sydney Adventist Forum creates community through conversation, and we're proud to present today's event with Avondale University Church. We acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet, the Awabakal people, and we pay respects to elders past and present. And we thank you for your interest, not so much in why justice should matter to people of faith, but in how faith can help make sense of the need for justice. I want you to keep that in mind because that's what makes this book different. Sharing your interest today in practicing justice are the National Director of Common Grace, Gershon Nimbaka, Chief Strategy Officer for the Adventist Development and Relief Agency International, Mark Webster, the CEO of ADRA Australia, Denison Grellman, and Marketing Specialist for Book Projects at Signs Publishing, Christina Hawkins. We're here perhaps because Nathan is, or despite Nathan banging on about justice again. But this is different. Historically, many campaigns for justice had strong roots in faith, but not so much now. Practicing justice then invites us as a movement of Jesus people to consider how the roots of our faith can ground and sustain this necessary and life-saving work. To begin the conversation about practicing justice, would you please welcome Nathan Brown.
Let's do some more banging on about justice. Some years ago, Mark Webster was helping me bang on about justice, and he got me an unusual speaking gig, and that was to speak at the prayer breakfast at the Australian Council for International Development, as in development world, ACFID. There's acronyms everywhere. And of course, this brings together a lot of the faith-based agencies. Out of the 140 agencies that are a part of ACFID, there's a significant portion of them that are faith-based, but not just Christian, also, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, and probably a few others. And they get together as a side meeting at their annual conference and pray together and have breakfast together, apparently. And they invited me to come and speak at that particular event, and this was about 10 years ago. The topic that I was asked to address caught my attention. How can faith-based agencies assist diverse staff and volunteers to develop a strong grasp of the faith roots in our work? And it's something that has continued to prompt my thinking, and is one of the starting points of this particular book. For most of the past 25 years, I've been writing and occasionally speaking predominantly in faith and church context. And following my understanding of justice as a dominant theme in the Bible and recognizing the sometimes silence and inactivism in many faith communities, I have spent quite a bit of my time working in those contexts, thinking about justice, as Brenton so politely put it. I've written quite a few articles, a handful of books, and study guides that have been used around the world, talking about the faithful imperative to do justice. I've also preached sermons, led workshops, and recorded quite a few podcast episodes on different aspects of the topic. But this particular speaking invitation caught my attention because it came at it from a different angle. It was kind of not just trying to convince good churchy folk that we should expect faith and justice to inform and sustain each other, even as we work with life.
So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Hill, we must never forget that all three were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. Two were extremists for immorality, and thus fell below that environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists.
So it's good to hear his voice, isn't it? A reminder how good he was at being able to get those ideas out. It's your turn in just a moment. I want you to start thinking of questions you might have about practicing justice, questions you might have for Nathan, comments you'd like to make. But Nathan, come and join us. We'll ask a couple of questions first while you're thinking. We'll give you a couple of goes at this. Locke's going to be moving about the room. So have a think about it, and just a few minutes we'll get to you with some questions. So Nathan, the genesis of this is a replication of a commitment card that you first saw in Why We Can't Wait. And you're going to put that up on the screen, I think, which is a recounting by Dr. King of the campaign in 1960 to challenge segregation in Birmingham, Alabama, most in America. What did you see in these 10 commandments?
Yeah, and we get jumpy when we have extra commandments, but this was a commitment card that people that wanted to march with Dr. King in Birmingham were asked to sign. And the thing that really caught my attention was that they're basically spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines. And both
take us through a couple of them.
So, I mean, we begin meditating daily on the teachings and life of Jesus, walk and talk in the manner of love for God, to pray, to sacrifice personal wishes, to observe ordinary rules of kindness and courtesy, to perform regular acts of service, to refrain from violence of fist, tongue, or heart, to strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. We can identify with that from our Adventist angle, and to follow the directions of the movement and the captain on a demonstration, as in to do it together. And I really think that looking over these, it caught my attention that this is kind of just living good life, but also very spiritually focused. And it underlies or underlines the real religious roots, the faith roots of the civil rights movement. But it also caught my imagination. What would it look like to actually live by this? And so the second half of the book actually works through point by point, 10 sections, looking at what might this look like in our own lives, in our own place, in our own work for seeking to do good in the world. And actually, ripped off Dr. Morton and put some actual experiments at the end of each one of them to say, hey, have a go at this. Put this into practice in your life. See what difference it makes in your interactions with others, your daily life, and the choices that you start to make.
I don't know whether you can see on this commitment card, but down in the bottom, there's a list of people who have to sign this card. Now, pretty much anyone involved in doing any of the work with Dr. King.
Yeah.
They all had to sign this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we kind of lose sight of at times is we think, Rosa Parks sat on the bus and then the next day they all down the street and then it was done. It was far more intentional and focused and community work, and there were so many boring things that had to be done to organise the movement that this actually was. The work of changing the world includes a lot of really boring stuff, and that's and I love that it's not just even the people. He describes in the book at some length about the training process that people were put through before they were put out onto the front lines. He makes a comment that not everybody that volunteered was included. You had to turn up to the workshops, you had to sign the commitment card, and you had to do some of the boring work before you got to go and do some sit-ins to prove that you were are really committed to the movement, and that it wasn't just you trying to be the hero of the story, but that it was a larger, more solid grounding in what the movement was actually about and the principles of nonviolence and the practice of faith.
It's in the book, by the way. So if you want a careful reading later, it's there. I was fascinated by that story, or the association that Charlie Davis makes, that pastor of the Select Baptist Church in Chicago, who argues that disconnect between faith and justice, teachings and traditions of the black church might be because black preachers went to white seminaries. Now, it does seem that any move from the margins to the centre mute prophetic voices. Why?
That's almost inevitable, I think. Yeah, I mean, when the system works for you, why change it? And that's one of the inertia factors that we all have, particularly those of us who are relatively well off. We need to have the empathy to actually be able to see the world from the perspective of those who most need the world to be changed. That's where we get, if we're doing okay, none of us have perfect lives, but a lot of us are doing okay. It's not a great burden to shake things up, but to risk losing so much of what we've got. But when we can recognise that, there are real people in our societies, in our communities, in our wider world, really need something to be changed now. We need food delivered to Gaza today. And if that doesn't happen, that tragedy, that is an injustice, that is a horror, that could horrify us. But, we've had lunch, and it's easy just to keep it's safer.
Yeah.
It's less uncomfortable to keep it at arm's length. And so, that's the inertia of comfortableness, of comfort, is something that those of us that enjoy it have to really wrestle with.
All right, let's go one more on this theme. Then we're going to open up to you. Responses to a global Adventist pastor survey, and I know Wendy Jackson from the seminary is here today, developed by a team led by Avondale Seminary. It revealed the same disconnect between faith and justice. A significant number of pastors worldwide, and I think it was about 15%, 16.4, I think, round down, indicated it was not the role of the church to advocate for justice. And closer to home, supporting this finding, was this. Pastors in the South Pacific reported involvement in the community at the bottom of a list of 10 ministry roles. Even in an ideal world, they do not rank involvement in the community in their top 3 roles. So, do these findings say more about the pastor, their profession, or their education?
Yes, and the church as well. Because I think that there's, we have a very narrow definition of what a pastor is. And when they don't fit those roles, the people above them and the people below them, whichever way you want to look at that, get jumpy. And that's so professionally and career-wise, I think there's a safe path. Now, that doesn't mean that many pastors don't do good things and work hard and all those things, but there is nothing that pushes them to do some of this stuff. It will only cause them. I mean, it's even if you go to a church planting summit, they'll tell you that if you want to grow a church, don't talk about justice, because justice churches don't grow. Maybe numbers aren't as important as faithfulness. And we actually can grow in some very significant ways if we step out our own risk, our own cost, our own whatever, to to the real needs of the world. And yeah, we're a church that exists for the purposes of itself largely.
All right, over to you. Do you have questions about practicing justice for Nathan? This is your turn. Just raise your hand. Locke will find you, and then you have the mic. The back, Locke. Maybe just identify yourself so we can refer to you.
Hi, thanks. Pastor Gregor Pillay, North New South Wales Conference. Hi, Nathan, thank you for your book. I'm really resonating with your focus on Dr. King, his lived justice. And I'm reminded of how Gandhi, though not Christian, often embodied Christ's justice teachings in ways that still challenge the church today. And justice conversations in Christianity often miss the post-colonial lens. That means our faith has historically been tied to empire and oppression. My question is, how do we as Adventists reckon with that history while still calling people to a gospel of justice and hope?
Good question, Greg. Thank you.
Great question. I mean, the one spot of hope in this is that the North American Division actually did put out a statement a couple of years ago now, rejecting the doctrine of discovery. That's a work that we should be doing here, because that is the theological foundation for so much, for basically the modern world, and so much of the injustice, economic disparity, colonization, everything that's happened in the last 600 years can basically be traced back to that document. And that's theology. And we really have subsumed that into our worldview in various ways, maybe not so much in practice, but we haven't very often addressed it in any significant way. But we've also really adopted it into our practice. And the fact that we can have a world session, get together all these people around the world and have a happy time and sing great songs, I'd say really nothing to the wider world. We don't understand what we're about. And I think that we have the opportunity. To me, this is a working theory I have. You mentioned post-colonialism. Christianity is post-colonial. We go back to the story of colonization, where some indigenous people had their land opportunities taken away from them. Adam and Eve were the original indigenous people. They had their world taken from them, and the whole entire project of the Bible is reclaiming that, is post-colonial. It's a post-colonial project of our world. And so that should give us great sympathy, great openness to post-colonialism in all its lesser forms. And that being what happens, the unfinished work in our relationship with our Indigenous people here in Australia. Some of the ways we do mission and evangelism in Australia and in the Pacific. Some of the attitudes and practices we bring into our church. It's a really big task, but we really need to put some work into it.
Great. Other questions?
Hi, Nathan. I'm Dr. Naomi Fraser, and I'm with Common Grace.
Good product placement.
I went to a march for Gaza, and I saw a banner for the New South Wales Union of Teachers, and there was a banner there for like a medical organisation, and there were a few other banners. And I didn't see any churches represented visually. There might have been people there like me, part of a church. And I asked my church if we could participate and have like a pilgrimage for Gaza following that non-violent prayer walk. And I was told it was too divisive. And so to practice justice in this way, I've had to go outside the church So I was wondering if you could speak to that theological thing I came up against of, no, we're called to unity and unity above everything. And this is too divisive.
It's a common refrain. Yes, we've heard that before.
Indeed.
Thank you for your question.
Coming from outside our Adventist bubble, we appreciate that we are not alone in both senses. The challenge that we have is that the call to justice is polarizing. You're on one side or the other. And polarizing kind of has been given this bad rap. And that's, partly because a lot of the polarization in our world is sort of artificial. It's manufactured, it's confected, it's exploited and beaten up for political purposes. But the whole message of the gospel is polarizing. Our old-fashioned evangelism where we say, do you choose Jesus or not, is polarizing. And I think we need to just be a little more ready, polarizing, to stand up for good, to stand up for right, to stand up for truth and justice. And, if that means we grow our churches smaller, our call is to faithfulness, not success.
Norm, I'm going to get to you in just a moment. I want to ask a question here based on what you've just said. Taking sides. In the chapter about God introducing God's self, that's what you call it, you use as your frame the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. In the Exodus, as many of you here and online will know, is the theme of the Seventh Adventist Church's adult Bible study guide this quarter. In the context of oppression...
Good product placement too.
Yes. In the context of oppression, you say that God firmly takes a side here. The Passover does not make for easy reading. Is the God as portrayed in the Exodus story and more widely in the Bible predominantly concerned more about justice or about mercy?
Yes. God doesn't have to choose one side or another. God is bigger than that. God will do both. One of my favourite quotes is from James Cone, where he says, if God had chosen the Egyptian slave masters rather than the Hebrew slaves, what a different understanding of God we would have. God chose a side. And it was countercultural to every other religion of the world, in the ancient world, because all of those, the gods were the gods of the king and the priests and the nobility and even that's one reason Sabbath is such a radical thing, because it's the only thing in the history of the ancient world where it was for the benefit of the ordinary people. Everybody else in all the other cultures had to keep working, even while the other people went and did their religious things, while the rich and the powerful went and did that. God chose to be on the side of the oppressed. And the reason that bugs us so much is when we aren't the oppressed. And if that makes us uncomfortable, we need to think about where we are positioned in the story and to learn to read the story a different way.
No.
After a question about Gaza, mine may sound not so important. My name is Norm. I'm the husband of Liz. And my question is the issue of the ordination of women a matter of justice? I don't mention LGBTQI because I think the answer to that is obvious. They are clearly oppressed. So that's my question. Is it a matter of justice, the ordination of women? Because it's so much more internal.
You keep asking easy questions. Yes. But I would also say that it's a symptom of our faulty theology. It's a system of our colonial theology. It's a symptom of our colonial theology. It's a symptom of our hierarchy theology. It's a symptom of our just basic assumption that some people are more valuable than others. And only some people would be brave enough and honest enough to say it that way. But one of the reasons I think that perhaps we as a church have a unique problem with justice is it does have some of those kind of implications that would even disrupt us. And that could be problematic.
I'll get to this question in just a moment. Just one more here on this topic. Kendra Holoviak-Valentine, a friend of Sydney Adventist Forums, Professor of New Testament Studies at La Sierra University. She tells a story of a black student in her class. And after a discussion like the one we just had, or we're having now, that student said they preferred a God of retributive justice. And that challenged her. What about you? You're an educated, rich, straight, white male.
I'm the problem.
How do you honour that sort of reading of who God might be?
Yeah, privilege is currency that we should spend. And when we talk about privilege, the things that educated, rich, white, whatever that list was, that they enjoy are the things that everybody should enjoy. Everybody should be listened to when they walk into a room, not just the white guy with a microphone at the front of the room. That'd make our meetings a bit messy, but, that might be okay too, at least some of the time. We need, so I really think that it's not that we should feel guilty about privilege, it's that that's what we want for everybody. We want the best of human flourishing for all people, as God created, intended, and intends it to be. That transforms human relationships, and the privileges that we have, the resources that we have, the voice that we have, the opportunities that we have should be used and spent in getting those, listening to the people from the margins, amplifying those voices, giving opportunities for more people to enjoy privilege. Mm. And as we can continue to do that and be a community that practices that, because none of us do it by ourselves, we can grow that.
A question, Anthony.
Hi, I'm Carolyn. I had a conversation with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and two phrases in there have been resonating since. One of them, we were talking about our church, and one of them is the middle classing of Adventism. And that might be a made-up word, but it really made sense. And the other thing she said was that we tend to pull off skirt. And I've thought about that a lot. But from your perspective, because I don't do the March for Gaza necessarily, but I like to think I do a little bit of stirring. And when 14, 15-year-old boys make inappropriate comments in my classroom, I pull them up on it. And do you think, I agree we need more stirring, but is the little bits of stirring enough? Or do we actually need to do a lot more stepping out of our comfort zone?
Yes.
Thanks, Carol.
The middle classing of Adventism, I think, is a fascinating sociological process, and it's well described in Seeking a Sanctuary. The idea that over 3 generations, with a little bit of education, good health, and stewardship, there is a trend within Adventism that takes uneducated immigrants, makes them, converts them, and within 3 generations, their grandkids are doctors and lawyers who ask hard questions and leave the church. That's a fascinating process. I'm the 3rd generation. Some of us choose to stay, and that can be a little tense at times. But so it is a real identifies, social dynamic of our, a sociology of Adventism, which is interesting. And I think it is replicated, it perhaps more so because of our peculiar emphasis on some of those things that we do it particularly well. And, and some people, I think it was actually when the authors of Seeking a Sanctuary were at a Spectrum conference and they were asked, what can we do about this process? And they said, well, shut all your universities and colleges. Stop educating people, because that's a problem. But yes, the little things matter as much as the big things, because it's like, the argument that we have between our author, Darren Morton, and our author, Sue Radd. Darren said if he has one thing that he wants everybody to do, it's to exercise. And Sue says food is the most important thing. And Sue's argument, not to disparage Darren, Sue's argument is that you eat multiple times a day. You make those choices every time. And so every little choice, and I think that's a significant part of the spiritual formation, if you'll let me use that language, that is in that, those 10 commitments, 10 commandments of the civil rights movement, is that by doing things as a regular habit and a regular practice, not only are you doing justice, but you are being shaped and formed and growing into the kind of people who will do justice. And so it matters, that one person that you have an interaction with, that you seek to encourage to be a more positive voice in your classroom. It matters to them, but it also matters because you are standing up for goodness in that context. And the next time you're in a context, you may speak up again. And we do it. That's the whole big picture of practicing justice. There's 3 meanings of the word.
I noticed you're using the S, not the C.
So that's the Australian form of a verb. And so practicing is something simply that we do. Practicing is something that we get better at by doing repeatedly, like piano lessons or shooting free throws or whatever your particular hobby is. And practicing is also a spiritual thing, the practices of our faith. And I think that all of those things are, big and small. We become justice people by doing it again and learning to do it better.
Another question.
Hello, I'm Hensley. My question is difficult to ask, but I'll try. Practicing justice is a moral Christian imperative. However, the problem, I think, is what to do, when to do, and where to act. I think when you read the Gospel of Luke, it is quite clear that the Gospel of Luke speaks in favor of the poor, the sick, the lame, the blind, and that Jesus, the kingdom of God, is here to relieve that kind of oppression, bring freedom to that oppression. But at the same time, the Gospel of Luke is positive about the Roman rule. It says nothing against the Roman occupation, speaks positively about the Romans. So perhaps my question is, how do we know how to practice justice, what to do, and when to do it? And here's a difficult part of the question. And Gaza has been talked about in our conversation. For me, I have friends in Palestine. I don't have friends in Gaza, I've got friends in the West Bank. I've got people I've spoken to in the West Bank. And my heart pains for them at this very time. But I must say that for me, it's difficult to participate in a march that will shout from the river to the sea, or a march that will say, Intifada, Intifada now. I agree that I would like, we see the pictures. Our eyes don't lie. that there is famine right now in Gaza. Nonetheless, I know that today there are 900 trucks that have crossed the Shalom border crossing and are just waiting there for the United Nations to distribute. So, yeah, it's a tension for me. What to do, when to do, and where to act.
Thanks for your question, Hensley.
Yeah, some significant considerations there. We should err on the side of generosity and people. And if that gets us in some unfortunate places and even on the wrong side of something, at least we were trying. We are in a messy, broken, tragic world. Whether somebody gets fed is kind of pretty simple. Now, I think, one of the things we had the situation of, the October 7 attacks happened the week before the referendum we had in Australia. And I spent my time and energy focusing on the referendum in Australia because I thought that's where I had much more voice, much more opportunity, and I even knew more about it. I've studied it, I've spent time, I've listened to Indigenous people, I've worked with Indigenous people, I've had those opportunities. And so the opportunity I have in that context is to use the resources that I have. And while I, particularly in those earlier stages, I was certainly conscious of Gaza, I was less involved in, going to some of the marches and some of those things. What we can do is serve in our communities. And our church was part of hosting a day for people from Gaza who were in Melbourne and being looked after by some of the good people of ADRA. We helped put on an afternoon where we got kids and played games and fed them good food, gave them things. And even in bringing them together, there were families that didn't know the others had got out or where they were in the world or whether they were still alive that met. That's world-changing for that family. And that's just a small thing. And my pastor, who I like to cite about, Moy Stiles, was the only Christian pastor in Melbourne who accepted an invitation to go and pray at the Palestinian protest vigil on the anniversary of October 7. She was scared. There was police everywhere. There was all sorts of things. And she wasn't sure if she was doing it. And I said, do you want me to come with you? And she said, I'll be right. But she was the one Christian pastor who said, I'm going to turn up and pray for you in the name of Jesus because it is the right thing to do. And I'm proud of her. And, that's the kind of thing. And we even had tension in our church about, well, I'm not sure if we should be doing that. And of course we should be, because it's first about people. And, there are complexities to some of these things, but the work of justice is actually finding our way through some of those complexities and finding good people to partner with who can help us do that. And not, we don't carry it ourselves. We do it in partnership with others. And there are plenty of people that are happy to have you helping them.
Excellent. We'll take one more question, then I've got one more, then we'll move on.
Cool.
So our last question.
I do get to speak, but later somebody else wants to ask me a question.
That's good of you, Gershon.
We appreciate you surrendering your privilege.
Testing. My name is Andrew. I'm reflecting on, my question has to do with the twin virtues of justice and righteousness. So when I think about justice, I think it's hard to talk about justice without there being an implicit judgment of injustice going on. It's not a word that we use unless there's injustice that we need to apply justice to. And so your beginning reference point is we are currently in a state of injustice. That seems to be what I'm observing with regards to the news and TikTok videos, all of that. But what I've also seen is that this implicit injustice, the belief, the assertion that there is injustice going on, we need justice, it triggers a very black and white view where people are either persecutors on the side of injustice, people are either victims of that injustice, or they're a savior interjecting and making it better. And what I've learned is that that triangle of viewing the world through that triangle is pathological and creates more problems. It seems that Martin Luther King diffused this with the emphasis on nonviolence and character, which focuses less on others and fortifies how one comports oneself. And when I reflect on that, it seems that justice is about the collective. It's about systems.
It's about relationships.
I've seen it applied to systems, but righteousness has to do with the individual me and how I do right by others. So they're all relationships, but they're different, maybe levels of relationship, perhaps. And mercy has to do with how we relate to those who are actively in suffering. And so, I don't know if you can call that a question, but it's sort of my attempt to wrestle with these issues and how perhaps a non-Christian reference point is missing something essential, which is the righteousness portion.
Yeah, there's a few different directions I can go from that. One of them is simply in the book, I think I use a larger, broader definition of justice than perhaps, and I think it is a very theological, God-based definition of justice, working definition of justice perhaps, and really that it is God's intention for creation and the relationality of it. And I think that's really, I do think that that is one of the helpful insights that sets apart faithful justice doing from some of the arguments about justice in the wider world. So I do think that there is a theological depth that we can bring to the work that helps us understand it and then do it in some different ways, even while working for many of the same things. So I think that's something that our faith does contribute. Partly I'm making the case in this book for what faith contributes to this larger project, this larger impulse towards justice in the world. So I think that we can, and to me, and I'm borrowing from others, the idea that really it's about right relationships. And of course, we have some scholars in the room that can talk about this far better than I, but the biblical language, when we talk about justice and righteousness, are not two different ideas. They're the same word. And we choose how we, it's hardly surprising that King James chose to translate it righteousness more often than justice, because when you're the king, you like people being good citizens, you don't like them being concerned about justice. And, so again, this is the colonization of our language, is that there have been intentional choices made about whether we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, which is us going to church and dressing well, or the kingdom of God and his justice, which is a much larger world-transforming kind of thing. And that's a choice that a translator of the Bible has to make. And if you read the Spanish edition of the Bible, it's always justice.
Another question,
Yeah.
and a brief answer, please, because we need to move on. You ask us to judge this book by its cover. The cover's over here, to my left and your right. Kate Pinchera's illustration of a Jesus Black Power salute caused some controversy on social media. So, briefly, what message are you and Kate trying to send?
Well, a work of art has a certain provocative quality to it. We spent a bit of time actually talking through how could we illustrate some of the ideas, and I really wanted this idea of resistance and non-violence, resistance and submission, resistance with love, and really that the ultimate act of submission and resistance was the crucifixion. It's victory by defeat. It's self-sacrifice that is all-conquering. So it's a pretty profound theological truth is at the heart of, the gospel, the whole story of Jesus. And of course, then we wanted to mess with the horizontal is the vertical. Often we've talked about that, there's the horizontal aspect of what Jesus did in his death that reconnects us with God, and then the horizontal that reconnects us with each other. The horizontal is the vertical, and the vertical is the horizontal. And so that's why it's on the wrong angle, and you can't turn it that way because the picture doesn't make sense. So it's intended to be a little provocative, and but I really like it, and I think it's a very strong image, and it was cool to work with an artist to actually make a book cover, and that's kind of cool.
Brenton, just before you finish this section, there is one small injustice that needs addressing. There is a question from the online stream, which we've just seen, and the online stream had some technical difficulties at the start. So can we take this question?
Let's do that.
The question is, I'll just read it out for everyone. The question is from Paul Johansson. The Christian church has fallen behind society in advocating for justice for non-heterosexual people. How can we avoid using doctrine to insulate us from injustice experienced by someone not like me?
Good question, Paul, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you to our online crowd. That's an issue that we've got to do some work on. And, again, it's an awkward aspect, it's an awkward implication of talking justice, is that it actually will step on some of our toes. We need to find ways to include. We need to find ways, even with people we might, if we choose to disagree, we still need to stand up for their rights. And I really think that, the marriage vote that we did in Australia was an amazing opportunity for the church to show that it can believe what it believes, but we can stand up for somebody else's rights. And, I really think that's something we need to recognise in a much bigger, more creative way, that imposing to me, one of the most useful things comes from Greg Boyd in his talking about the myth of a Christian nation and how we can engage politically about the difference between power over and power under, and how it's not our job to impose our beliefs, our faith, our doctrine on others. We can certainly invite them to it, but we don't use power for that purpose. We use power to lift people up and to stand with people who are honest.
It's a good place to leave it. Would you please thank me? And by the way, for those watching online, yes, you did miss Nathan's presentation, but maybe we did this on purpose. If you read the first chapter of the book, you're going to get most of it. So find that book on Amazon or at adventistbookcenter.com.au. Common Grace is a movement of individuals, churches and communities pursuing Jesus and justice for people who identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, creation and climate, people seeking asylum, and victims of domestic and family violence. The National Director is Gershon Nimbarka. Please welcome him as, on our behalf, he responds to Nathan's presentation.
This is a privilege, both to respond to your presentation and to the book. Rooms like this are often the places that I find the most joy in, and I've loved the conversation that we've been having, a room full of people that are following Jesus, that are trying to discern this work of justice in the world. It's such a joy to be with you to help launch Practicing Justice, a crucial, deeply thoughtful, and critically timely book from my friend Nathan Brown. I am the National Director of Common Grace. We are a movement now of tens of thousands of Christians, animated by a vision of the world where all people and all of creation flourish as God intends. And we pursue that vision by centering love, being shaped by Christ, being grounded in hope, embodying grace, and pursuing justice together. I was trying to do the maths on this. I've had the privilege of practicing justice alongside Nathan for almost a decade and a half now. That shows how old we're getting. Still not quite as old as Mark Webster. But, and Nathan, throughout that time, has been a prophetic voice, not just into the Adventist church, but beyond it, persistently and consistently reminding us of the justice-shaped heart of God and the radical call that those of us that claim to follow Jesus need to pursue in that. I've read a number of his Bible studies and some of his books in the past, and I think Practicing Justice is perhaps one of the clearest and most practical things that Nathan has produced to remind us of this important work. And I've read a lot of books on justice in my time. It's probably one of the most accessible, compelling, and practical tools that we can have and that we can put in the hands of people to help pursue this work. It gives us a whistle-stop tour through the theological roots of the Christian vision of justice. And then it steps into the second part, which gives us the spiritual disciplines that we've talked about that allow us to practice it. For most of my working life, for about the last 2 decades, I've given my life towards seeing the goal of the church take up what I think is its prophetic vocation, to reflect the justice-shaped character of God. As Nathan reminds us in the book, as we heard in that Martin Luther King Jr. short excerpt, perhaps the most central tenet of our faith is that God is love. And we are called to be people that reflect this love outwards. And in the words of Cornel West, who Nathan quotes, justice is what love looks like in public. In a world, we've had some of this come up in our conversation, that is so deeply broken. It feels like, I'm an optimist. I usually see the good that we are progressing towards. But it feels in so many ways we are going backwards right now. And in a world so deeply broken, I believe we need our movement of people following Jesus, to be people, as Nathan puts it in his book, of a prophetic imagination. Not just believe that things don't have to be this way, but know that they won't always be this way. That know that transformation is not just possible, it is inevitable. And from that imagination, from that assurance, act to see the change now. Even when others say it is difficult. Even when we're conditioned to believe that things will always be this way, because this is just the way of the world. Even when the powerful keep trying to remind everyone else that the status quo must exist. We are called to have that prophetic imagination that sits on the side of the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized. It's the kind of hope-filled discipleship that I believe transforms communities, can renew the church, and bear witness to the good news of Jesus. It's what practicing justice calls us to and reminds us of. Nathan gave us a deep dive of what that looked like in the civil rights movement, in the United States, but throughout history, Christianity has borne witness to this powerful transformation. It reformed the Roman Empire, even as perhaps the critiques weren't as obvious as some might like them to be. The early movement of the church absolutely changed the Roman world, and then changed the Western mindset, and then sent this belief into the world that all people are created in the image of God. It launched the transatlantic slave trade, pushed forward the civil rights movement. And in my years of working for justice here in Australia, I have seen time and time again the transformation that is possible when we take seriously the work of practicing justice. That's why I want this book in the hands of more people. That's why Common Grace will be talking about it with our supporters. That's why you should not just buy it, but buy a couple of copies to hand out. Because we need this movement of people animated by a prophetic imagination and practicing justice together. It's the kind of faith that Common Grace has been working to cultivate since its inception. A faith that is Jesus-shaped, justice-orientated, and public. Whether it's standing alongside, as Wayne pointed out, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people pursuing climate justice, being compassionate to refugees, confronting domestic violence, or just helping people to live out justice in whatever way their heart calls them to. It's a work grounded in the vision that is articulated by practicing justice. Nathan's already used this line from his book. Practicing justice is like learning an instrument or mastering free throws. The more we do it, and I mean the collective we, not just me, not just you, the more we do it as a community, as churches, in groups, finding whoever we can bring together, the better we will get at it and the bigger the change will be. Mark Webster also got me to do a speech for the Adventist this time rather than ACFID. I got to speak at an ADRA Gain conference. And since that time, I spent about 4 or 5 years working with Adventists internationally on the Global Education Campaign. And I got to see a number of ADRA programs around the world, and I've seen the amazing work that the Adventist movement is doing in the world. I've seen the way ADRA helps respond to real need in transformational ways. And that is a work of justice, and that is a work of mercy, and it is wonderful. But I've also seen, and we picked up on some of this in the discussion, the uncertainty, the tentativeness, when it comes to stepping in and challenging the systems and structures that perpetuate the problems that we are trying to address. And unless we step in boldly, unless we take the spiritual disciplines that Nathan has talked about seriously, we end up just putting band-aids on problems that are getting worse. As limbs begin to fall off, we find a new band-aid to try to strap on it. As USAID is cancelled, we worry about being too political. As crises grow, we become too tentative. We need aid agencies need to take the work of practicing justice seriously. I hope this book resonates with you. Nathan has asked me to do one piece of product placement here, which is for the Common Grace movement. The book lines up a whole bunch of ways that you can practice justice. But one way you can do that is by joining this movement of tens of thousands of Christians that are working to do that better. I'm on to my second read of the book now. There will be things that I will be taking back to our movement as we think through and try to do better. Join us as we do that. One of the most concrete ways you can do that is we have at the end of this year a conference called Let Justice Flow, where we will come together, we'll learn about how to do justice, we'll pray about it, and then we'll act out on it. We'll go meet politicians and confront them on issues of injustice, like why are we still locking up 10-year-old children in Australia rather than surrounding them with care and love? Why are we not doing enough about the climate crisis? So please grab the book, not just for you, but for those around you, and let's practice justice together. Thanks.
All right, so Gershon's put the challenge out there. We did want to give you the opportunity not just to ask questions, but to actually put justice into practice with an S. So Nathan, explain how we can do that. 3 simple ways. Gershon's already given us one. What are the other 2?
We'll revisit that one in a moment. So 3 practicing justice challenges for you this evening. The first is to buy a copy of the book, and to buy one for somebody else as an act of advocacy in helping move our church on this. It's kind of hard to sell a book on justice in the church. And I'm not doing it to make money. I don't make anything out of this. But I do want people to read it and engage with it, and I want it to make a difference and to move our church. You're my first bunch of advocates. You've done the advocacy training. And we have the resources for you to take with you. So the first thing is to take a copy of the book for someone else. And, it may be someone in influence in your church, a pastor or a leader, or, maybe a young person that really is interested in these topics, and you want to give them an invitation to think about how their faith is a part of it. The second one is that we're asking you to donate to ADRA. And you can do it on your way out the door this evening. You can do it as an add-on to buying your copies of the book. We have some art prints of the cover art for the book, and Charlene is up at the back there holding up one of those, and we have some suggested donations amounts. If you donate to ADRA, Charlene can process your donation, get a receipt to you, and as a thank you, you can take home a little bit of the art of the book. And the third thing is an invitation not just to join Gershon and Naomi, but myself as well, because I've already signed up, to come and be part of the Let Justice Flow conference in Canberra at the beginning of November. A couple of days of worship and training and group work, and working out how you actually have meetings with politicians, and then a day in Parliament House having a chat to Australia's elected representatives on some of the issues that Gershon mentioned. We've just got a very short teaser video to share with you, but that's a challenge that I'd like you to think about. I think it's about 13 years ago, Harwood lined me up, and Joe as well, and Mark. That was the 3 of us. We're still here, and took us to Canberra for Voices for Justice, which was a forerunner. And that to me has been one of the continuing to practice that, getting better at it by doing it quite a few times now, has been one of my best regular experiences of practicing my faith. And so I want you to have that experience. So, Andrew, as you've heard, is a big supporter of practicing justice, the act and the book. It's CEO Dennis Grellman here with us today to offer a prayer of dedication.
If you are able to stand, please stand with me as we say a blessing. This book. Our Heavenly Father, we've been blessed by the expose that we've just had on the Practicing Justice book. For those of us that have already read it, it is not just inspirational,